This Tuesday, August 31st, is a celebration of the International Day for People of African Descent for the first time. Brazilian trade unions have called for broad sectors of society to unite and mobilize against the government of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Despite the chaotic scenes to the contrary, US President Joe Biden claimed Tuesday that he was ready for every eventuality in a withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The International Day for People of African Descent is celebrated this Tuesday, August 31st, for the first time. Through this day, the United Nations sets out to promote the extraordinary contributions of the African diaspora around the world and to work towards eliminating all forms of discrimination against people of African descent. The world today is full of examples of racism and discrimination, with the last year's mobilizations against police brutality and systemic racism in the United States making global headlines and sparking protests across the world to draw attention to these issues wherever they take place. The Comptroller General of Bolivia stated that the Organization of American States failed to review the 35,000 voting records of the 2019 general elections and therefore did not carry out an extensive audit before making its claims of electoral fraud. Henry Ara said that in breach of its agreement with the government, the OAS submitted a report based entirely on speculation and did not provide sufficient evidence for the claims. The Comptroller General stressed that the publication of the OAS report was used as a trigger for the sectors of the armed forces and far-right groups to conduct the coup against the Morales government, breaking with the constitutional order with serious consequences for the people of Bolivia.
Given the nature of the agreement the OAS signed with Bolivia, the type of audit carried out following the agreement signed was a special one. The assignment that Bolivia had at that time was to carry out an audit, and this is what the agreement that was made public stated about the final tally, about the statistics, the verification of the voting acts. When we evaluated the report, the audit did not include these elements, so the OAS did not comply with the agreement that Bolivia made with them.
In Guatemala, a judge sent 2 retired soldiers to trial on genocide charges and crimes against humanity for the genocide of the Ixil people. The resolution by which Judge Miguel Ángel Gálvez ordered the trial process validates almost 200 testimonies, 148 forensic reports, plus scientific, military and historical documents that confirm the massacre of approximately 1,731 people from the Ixil community. The 2 accused retired military men, Benedicto Lucas and Manuel Callejas, were already sentenced to 58 years in prison in 2018 for the disappearance of 14-year-old Marco Antonio Molina Tesson and for the rape of his sister. Judge Galvez's resolution seeks to pursue those who participated actively in the spiral of forced displacements, rape and torture of thousands of Mayan indigenous families during the government of General Romero Lucas between 1978 and 1982.
And see here that in another fragment it says to all prisoners of war, I believe it says that then all prisoners of war were armed guerrillas who were apprehended. It sounded odd that those 10 people who arrived that night, none of them carried a firearm. They were all farmers and workers from different places. Sure, they were going to catch people only for the sake of catching them, and since he took people to his students only so he could teach them how to torture, because that's what he did, that is documented. That is why in this hell they held up so many people, and why they buried so many of them. This is what is being explained, see?
Political instability and a lack of consensus continue in Haiti, a country experiencing a deep social crisis aggravated by the recent impact of the earthquake and several tropical storms. Magnacide, kidnapping, rapes, massacres, political and religious persecution, that is the day-to-day for many Haitians. While the country's political elite tests out models seeking a national agreement to govern, at least 4 groups have emerged with initiatives that prioritise the fight against corruption, the strengthening of the judicial branch and the optimisation of the electoral system, with little regard for health and social support or plans to reduce the ongoing violence. Prime Minister Ariel Henry's government lacks the support of many opposition sectors that only see unfulfilled promises amid a humanitarian crisis that has affected over 650,000 people. President of Ecuador, Guillermo Lasso, has completed his first 100 days in office in the midst of the popular discontent due to the rise in fuel prices, as well as the budget cuts applied to universities. The right-wing president has focused his administration's efforts on scoring a first triumph by fulfilling his promise to immunise some 9 million Ecuadorians against COVID-19, that is 60% of the population. However, broad sectors are opposed to Lasso's economic agenda, which includes the privatisation of state resources in the oil sector, expansion in mining and labour reform. Since the lack of jobs is among the number one concerns of the population, it remains to be seen whether the president will be able to remedy a scenario where only 32% of the active labour force is working full-time and earning at least the minimum wage. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Brazilian trade unions have called for broad sectors of society to unite and mobilise against the government of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. As Brazil faces an escalating economic, social and political crisis, workers' representatives criticise the increasing authoritarian nature of the Bolsonaro government and warned of the need for unity on the eve of the 199th anniversary of the Proclamation of Independence. Unions have called on broad sectors to come together to address the abuse of power, urgent issues such as the creation of decent jobs, the need for social programmes for the most vulnerable sectors, and an adequate plan to tackle the health crisis sparked by COVID-19. Nigerian officials have called for central government help in the north of the country after the surrender in recent months of 3,000 people, including hundreds of Boko Haram members and others living under the rule of the terrorist group. Nigeria's military has cited the latest development in the 12-year-long conflict as evidence they are succeeding against the group. But the fighters and their families started coming in after Boko Haram chief Abubakar Seku was killed during fighting with rivals from the Islamic State West Africa province in May. The Islamic State group is now said to be dominating the area. Many who had surrendered were women, children and farmers who had been forced to work in what was Boko Haram-controlled territory. The Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games have already seen medals for Latin American athletes performing at their best. From Venezuela, Linda Perez won the nation's first gold medal in this edition of the Games. Perez secured a personal best in the finals of the 100 metres T11 category. The young athlete becomes the second gold medal winner for Venezuela in the history of the Paralympic Games. And we stay on the tracks as Cuba's Amara Durand won her sixth Paralympic gold medal. Durand's latest triumph came in the 400 metres in the T12 category. Amara is considered the face of Cuban Paralympic athletics after winning 3 gold medals at Rio 2016 and 2 at London 2012. She has once again added to her legendary status in Tokyo by beating her record of 10 years as undefeated Paralympic champion. Was the second secured by Cuba at Tokyo 2020 after young athlete Robiel Sol won in the long jump T46 to secure the Caribbean nation's first gold medal. Madagascar is on the brink of experiencing the world's first climate change famine, according to the United Nations, after 4 years without rain. Tens of thousands of people are already suffering catastrophic levels of hunger and food insecurity as the country sees its worst drought in 4 decades, which has devastated isolated farming communities in the south of the country. The UN estimates that 30,000 people are currently experiencing the highest internationally recognised level of food insecurity, level 5, and there are concerns the number affected could rise sharply as Madagascar enters the traditional lean season before harvest. Although Madagascar experiences frequent droughts and is often affected by the change in weather patterns, experts believe climate change is directly linked to the current crisis. Thousands of people were ordered to evacuate as a huge wildfire loomed over a major United States tourist spot in California, filling the air with choking smoke. The Caldor fire has already torn through more than 700 square kilometers, razing hundreds of buildings. The California Fire Incident Commander confirmed the blaze was roaring towards South Lake Tahoe, the main resort town in the popular holiday area that spans the California and Nevada border. The fires are being driven by a historic drought as climate change takes a visible and painful toll, and people living in the area are forced to flee. More than 3 months after the eruption of the Nyiragongo volcano in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, thousands are still living in makeshift shelters and crying out for government help. An estimated 400,000 of the 600,000 residents of the city of Goma left in the wake of the one-day eruption of the volcano, and over 30 people were killed due to lava burns or asphyxiation and in accidents during the panicked exodus, while hundreds of homes were destroyed. Many survivors continue to live in makeshift houses under tarpaulins and without the basic sanitary conditions.
After all the people return, I built this tent which I live in. We are lacking food. We are suffering in this camp. We risk starving to death. We need the government to help us by giving us food. If I find a small job with people of goodwill, I can often earn 2,000 Congolese francs. The government must give us something to eat and find a solution to get us out of this misery.
Floodwaters rose across northeastern India, where hundreds of thousands of people were left stranded on the roofs of their homes or fled to higher ground as more torrential rain fell. Incessant downpours for more than a week forced the Brahmaputra and other major rivers to burst their banks across Assam and Bihar states. Up to 2 meters of water have submerged many villages, as experts stated that annual floods are getting worse because of climate change. The floods have also threatened a UNESCO World Heritage listed reserve that is home to the largest concentration of great Indian rhinos. Tens of thousands of people are stuck in villages cut off by the floods, and the state government said that more than 400,000 had been moved to higher ground.
Floods create havoc every year here. The water level has been high for more than a week. We usually take shelter in relief camps, but there is a huge scarcity of drinking water. We have not received much help from the authorities and others so far. There is one area of raised land, but it is not big enough for so many villagers. So we are really suffering.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Despite the chaotic scenes to the contrary, US President Joe Biden claimed Tuesday that he was ready for every eventuality in the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Speaking one day after the last US troops left Afghanistan, Biden defended his decision to exit the country, describing it as the best decision for America. Biden claimed the US had achieved its original goal in Afghanistan by hunting down Osama bin Laden, but stressed that the terrorist threat has since changed and the US will maintain its fight against it, but without the need to fight a ground war to do it. Something that has been clearly seen already as the US used drones to strike alleged ISIS-K targets, with 10 members of one family, including 7 children, killed in one such strike on Sunday. Despite the rhetoric, more foreign intervention led by the US can be expected in the ravaged country. As different nations work to establish new relations with those ruling Afghanistan, India's ambassador to Qatar held talks with the top Taliban leader on Tuesday. According to the Indian Foreign Ministry, the meeting was requested by the Taliban. The two sides discussed the safety of Indian nationals who remain on Afghan soil. India invested over $3 billion in Afghanistan during the US occupation and the former government of Ashraf Ghani, including in dams, roads and trade infrastructure. Afghanistan is vital to India's strategic interests in the region. In the wake of the situation in Afghanistan and global outcry regarding those attempting to flee the country, European Union member states met to once again study their immigration policy. During the roundtable meeting on Tuesday in Brussels, EU Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell outlined a plan to help Afghanistan's neighbouring countries to take in asylum seekers, once again showing the unwillingness of European states who played their role in the 20-year conflict to take in those who suffer its consequences. Instead, there are plans to finance the construction of reception centres for asylum seekers outside the borders of the EU to try to prevent the refugee crisis from reaching Europe. In an exclusive interview for teleSUR, Palestinian-Chilean analyst Nicola Hadwa Shawan referred to the United States' military failure in the face of the Afghan people's resistance.
The United States military campaign failed. They were defeated by the Afghan people's resistance, which didn't want the Afghans to fight among themselves. This explains how 300,000 soldiers between NATO and US troops weren't able to defeat the Taliban that counts only with 80,000 combatants. It is clear this way that the Afghan people supported the Taliban.
The analyst also highlighted that Washington must respect Afghanistan's right to self-determination.
The US does not have any right to be in Afghanistan, whatever the form of government existing there. This is an issue that concerns the Afghans, not the United States. That is firstly. The second point is that every time the United States invade a country in the name of democracy, human rights and freedom, that nation becomes a madhouse or a slaughterhouse. That's another one of the particular traits of it all. We've seen it in Syria, also in Iraq.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomed the news on Tuesday that the bloc had reached its goal of vaccinating 70% of European adults by the end of the summer. Despite this success, cases are surging in many European nations, while they remain exposed due to the lack of vaccination in other nations and their unwillingness to share jabs.
Today, we reached an important milestone in our vaccination campaign. 70% of adults in the European Union are now fully vaccinated. And that is more than 250 million people who are immunized. And this is a great achievement, which really shows what we can do when we work together. We need to help the rest of the world vaccinate too. The European Union is already doing a lot. We are exporting and we are donating vaccines to our partners. And we are a lead contributor to COVAX. COVAX, this is our mechanism to secure vaccines for low and middle-income countries. But more needs to be done. And we will continue to support our partners in this effort, because we will only end this pandemic if we defeat it in every corner of the globe.
The European Union recommended that its 27 nations reinstate restrictions on tourists from the United States due to rising coronavirus infections there. Vaccinated travellers will still be permitted to enter EU member countries, but the guidance is to restrict the entry of other travellers. However, this is not compulsory and each nation implements its own policies, meaning US travellers should expect a mishmash of travel rules across the continent. Possible restrictions could include quarantines, further testing requirements upon arrival, or even a total ban on all non-essential travel from the United States. Governments of Latin America and the Caribbean are making progress in their mass vaccination campaigns against COVID-19. The government of Venezuela ordered to triple efforts in its vaccination campaign with an increase in the number of vaccination centres. Meanwhile, in Uruguay, according to authorities, 70% of the population has been vaccinated and infection rates have dropped. Likewise, the government of Mexico announced that 100 million doses of vaccines against the coronavirus, which have been acquired through different countries, are about to arrive. Meanwhile, Cuba is also making progress in its vaccination campaign as the only country in the region to produce its own vaccines. Health authorities announced Tuesday that the Soberana 02 vaccine candidate has proven to be effective in paediatric trials, and they hope to begin administering the shots to the entire child population soon. In South Korea, healthcare workers belonging to the Korean Health and Medical Workers Union have overwhelmingly voted to take strike action, citing overwork and stress, which have been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Sector workers are demanding improved conditions and plan to walk out on September 2nd if their demands are not met. This will be the largest strike of medical workers since 2004. The union announced that from among the nearly 57,000 union members, more than 45,000 workers voted on the strike action, with more than 41,000 voting yes. Medical workers have put forward 8 demands, including 3 to improve medical conditions and services, and 5 others addressing their working conditions. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but we finish with a video produced by the UN Human Rights Office on the occasion of the first International Day for People of African Descent. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website and our social media pages. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.
We're always trying to implement laws because we're thinking about the others who have passed away behind my brother.
Systemic racism is a set of racialized norms that have been embedded in our law, our policy, our practices. And what it's done is really licensed atrocity.
The status quo is untenable. Systemic racism needs a systemic response. We need a transformative approach that tackles the interconnected areas that drive racism and lead to repeated, wholly avoidable tragedies like the death of George Floyd.
When we're talking about transformative change, we're talking about disrupting a system that has defined our modern global economy, that has defined our modern transnational relationships.
We see it in alienation from ancestral lands and in general poverty and marginalization. We see it in racial profiling, including at international borders, just on the basis of skin color. We see it in anti-Black hate speech, police violence, and even the taunting of Black players at football games. And right now, in this time of COVID-19, we're seeing it in unequal access to vaccines and healthcare.
I'm calling on all states to stop denying and start dismantling racism, to end impunity and build trust, to listen to the voices of people of African descent, and to confront past legacies and deliver redress.
So part of the reversing of a culture of denial needs to start with acknowledgement. It needs to start with a commitment to accountability. It needs to start with an understanding of the right to reparations, which is an internationally recognized human right.
States must show a stronger political will to accelerate action for racial justice, redress and equality through specific time-bound commitments to achieve results. This will involve reimagining policing and reforming the criminal justice system, which have consistently reduced discriminatory outcomes for people of African descent. Only approaches that tackle both the endemic shortcomings in law enforcement and address systemic racism and the legacies it is built on will do justice to the memory of George Floyd and so many others whose lives have been lost or irreparably damaged.